If you enjoy what we do on these podcasts, please go to mwpnews.com. There you can see articles about some of the movies we've seen, some things that we don't talk about on podcasts, and links to ways you can support the show. Thank you. Good evening, and welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam, finishing up a very long week. I mean, I don't like saying that, let me be honest, because, that's the thing, is that it's I get to do this, and people care what I have to say, and people listen, and I always feel weird saying it's a long week, doing this. It was one of the things, I was listening to this podcast, they did video game reviews, and they were like, oh my god, it's it's so much work, and it's look, yeah, it's work, but at the same time, it's what's better than this? Regardless, point is, I've just seen Gladiator II, and I have mixed feelings about it, because, look, on the one hand, I don't think there's anyone today who's better at doing these big historical epics, be it, The Last Duel with Jodie Comer and Ben Affleck and, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, be it that, be it, what was the other one he did recently? Oh, Napoleon last year. I don't think there's anyone better at kind of crafting these big, sweeping action set pieces that are needed in these historical epics, and Ridley Scott can do that every time very well. And when you get those scenes, they work very well. The problem is, I think this movie kind of scales down in a way that you don't really get that. And to that end, when you get to the end and they're kind of setting up for this big battle, it's kind of we don't need to have the battle anyway, let's move it on. And I think that had this movie not come out after Dune Part 2, I probably would have been a little bit more impressed. Because fundamentally, Dune Part 2 does the gladiator pits so well. The scenes with Fade fighting in the slave pits on Giedi Prime are so much better shot, so much more exciting, and so much more interesting than what happens in this movie when we see him fighting in the Colosseum, that it's kind of hard to look at this and be I enjoyed that, because there's another movie that came out within the same year that did what this movie does, but better. That said, the movie does have a lot of really great points that do kind of work, and hit exactly the emotional points that I'm looking for, that work very well. I'm not going to spoil it now, but there are a few things that if you listen to this show, you can probably approximate what I'm talking about. I love Denzel Washington in this movie. He's fantastic. I love Paul Mescal in this movie. He's also fantastic. Connie Nielsen does a really good job too. And I think that, again, going into this with production design in mind and everything that's done, on that technical level to create the kind of spectacle that comes from a historical epic is done so well. That said, it's very small scale at times. It doesn't feel as grand as what we've become accustomed to. And the other thing that kind of happens that I think is a big disappointment is the CGI is lacking at times. Where it's look, I get you're not going to use real animals in a lot of these sequences because it's cruel, but I'm thinking very specifically about an early sequence where Paul Mescal is fighting a monkey, and my first thought when I'm watching it is wow, that monkey looks just as good as the Outriders did in Infinity War. That should not be the case, and it looks just as fake, and it's is that really how big that would look? And it looks kind of weird and lanky, and I don't know. And then it's that opening sequence, it's beautiful. It the way it looks is beautiful, and if I'm watching an animated movie, the way that opening ocean battle is shot is beautiful for an animated movie. For a live action movie, it stands out. It looks like a cutscene in a video game. I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's a very high quality video game. I'm talking those trailers that we used to get for World of Warcraft that were like, whoa, why is the animation this good? And why is the CGI this good? Like, that kind of thing is just fantastic to look at. And I think that, like, in this case, though, where you're cutting between that and then cutting back to real-life Pedro Pascal running around and cutting back to Paul Mescal and the rest of the people up on top, it's one of those things where it's like, it's just kind of a little jarring. And I think the CGI being as spotty as it is, as often as it's spotty, it really just begs the question, like, yeah, I get you can't do this in live action. Like, the spectacle they're going for in that scene, you can't do it in live action. And you know what, you have to use CG for it. But maybe shoot around it so you have to use less CG and use more practical. Maybe, I don't know. I think the sound mix is a little weird at times, too. And the accent work, especially around the twin emperors. There are times where they're saying dialogue and I can't hear what they're saying, and I'm just kind of like, you gotta pick it up from context clues from other people talking. But that said, it's like, enough of the moments that you need to land in the movie land to where you're like, all right, maybe that doesn't quite work, maybe this doesn't quite work. Like, that it's like, when you get to, and we'll get to spoilers in a minute, when you get to these big moments, those emotional moments hit, even if the logic leading up to it didn't quite make a lot of sense. And it's like, look, it's at the end of the day, if you can get an emotional resonance point, then hit it, and if that's what you're gonna go and you're gonna do that, great, hit that emotional resonance point 100% of the time. And this movie does it 98%. But yeah, so from here on out, spoilers. I didn't want to go into the spoiler part because I think there's a pretty big spoiler in the movie that the marketing materials were not really showing off. I think that I didn't want to spoil it for anyone who was waiting to see the movie. So if you're listening from here on, please acknowledge, spoilers beyond this point. I like the idea of Paul Mescal playing Lucius, Maximus's son, and I think that, like, this is kind of the entirety of what I'm talking about, is, like, everything that goes into the kind of political intrigue around this, be it Denzel Washington trying to House of Cards his way into being emperor by unseating the current emperors and taking on the role for himself. It's very Shakespearean, and I said House of Cards, it feels very Shakespearean, and I think that it comes kind of, like, it's not really well laid out up until that point what his plans are, and then all of a sudden his plans are there, and it's like, oh, okay, so he wants to be emperor, cool, alright, moving on. And then once those machinations start turning, he plays it well enough where you're like, I'm along for this ride, let's go. Similarly, the same thing goes with Paul Mescal with the way he plays the, oh, I'm your son, I'm not your son. If I was your son, you should know that guy died a long time ago and I'm not him. Like, that whole thing, it plays very much like in the, what's it called? In the Family Guy Empire Strikes Back, when it's the movie theater, not the movie theater, the convenience store guy who's always talking about movies, who's Yoda, and he's talking about, like, and he's like, hi, I'm looking for Yoda. Oh, I'll take you. I'm not Yoda. Oh, okay, can you take me to him? Okay, I'm Yoda. That's kind of what it felt like, where it's like, we have this whole thing going on here with, with these kind of, what do I look for here, like these characters who aren't acknowledging the lineage, and there's really not an inflection point in the movie where it's like he's going to flip and change that we see. Like, I think what the movie is expecting you to do is extrapolate a lot of information that's coming at you from scenes that characters may not exactly be privy to the information, but still extrapolate as that as part of the motivation. Because, like, that's the thing, is that it's like, we have to take into consideration, for the majority of this movie, Paul Mescal is in a cage and in captivity. So, like, the idea that, like, you know, he's seeing all of these machinations, he's not privy to any of this. He's in a cage. He might hear passing things from people, but he's not, you know, he's not anywhere with any semblance of power. That said, it's like, you know, when we get to these moments where he's taking these changes and he's, you know, and he's making these adjustments, like, I think we're meant to interpret him seeing his father's armor as an inflection point. I just don't think we really lay into that scene long enough and hang on that moment long enough to make it really last. Like, what that moment ends up being like for me is me being able to be like, oh, I know where we're going with this. This is going to be, like, this is going to lead into the third act where it's going to be the Adonis gets the shorts that are identical to the ones his father wore in the first fight against Rocky. That's what that moment's going to be. It's going to be him getting that armor, and that's going to be, he's going to go out wearing his father's armor in the arena, and that's what that is at a certain point, where it's like, but it doesn't, because you're not hanging on the emotion of the moment of him, you know, dealing with the impact of, you know, his legacy, because you're not hanging on that moment and really letting that moment breathe. It kind of doesn't exactly have the ramifications. So, like, it ends up just being like, oh, so I'm just extrapolating out that I should feel this way, so Paul Mescal should also feel this way. So, which is not a great way to handle your movie. What else have we got? And that's kind of like my big issue with it, is that it's like there's so much going on. And all of it is, like, kind of interesting, but none of it is super interesting. Like, it's all a bunch of really great B plots. And that's the thing, too, is that I feel like this is one of those movies that would have been better off as a TV show. Like, if this was like a 4-episode miniseries on Paramount Plus, and they were like, hey, we're doing Gladiator II, but we're doing it as a 4-part miniseries on our streaming service, like, boom, sign me up, I'm in. This would have been a lot better that way, because you get more time to let things breathe and let the characters really explore who they are and all of that. You don't really get that much of a chance here. And because there are so many moving parts here that need to be kind of laid out, a lot of them feel underbaked, which is kind of disappointing. But I think we've got a lot, you know, I think the movie's got a lot going for it. I would say this is a solid, like, 4.5. I think that the only reason that I would say it's you know, that is because clearly this movie is shot for a big screen experience, and again, we don't really have our new rating system intact yet. But I think the movie's not bad. If you're looking for something to scratch that historical epic itch that you may have, this will do it. It's just, you know, I would say lower your expectations on what you're expecting on the visual side of things, and just get ready for some really fun Denzel Washington, just getting to chew the scenery and do that. And, you know, you may get some great moments that, like, you may enjoy some of the other moments, but I think that's really what you're going to be going into with the expectation to get enjoyment out of it. It's Denzel's show, and it's Denzel's world, and we're all just living in it. But I think that's as good a place as any to wrap up for today. It is Friday the 22nd, a week from today. If you go on, and I will be putting up an update on the website on nwpnews.com. If you go on there, you'll be able to see the pre-order for the new book. And I've called it Audible. It was going to be part 2 of Succession Planning. And I think part of what I ran into is that there were a lot of interesting ideas for Succession Planning Part 2, and kind of broad, interesting ideas, but getting the minutia down of it wasn't quite clicking. So we called it Audible. And we're going to be doing Echo Delta Part 2 instead. Echo Delta Part 2 will be coming out next Friday. But yeah, you can pre-order it on the website, which will link you to Amazon where it's available. But But yeah, I think this is as good a place as any to wrap up for today. Our next episode will be Monday morning. We'll definitely be doing Dune Prophecy Episode 2. But before that, we are almost certainly going to do Emilia Perez. Emilia Perez being the new Netflix movie that I've been intending to watch, but I have not yet. But I will be this weekend. So that'll probably be Sunday, because I don't want to watch 2 new movies in one night. And then Monday we'll be talking about Moana. Not Moana 2, and not here, over on 30-Minute Reviews. We'll be talking about Moana. And then, we'll wrap up there for today. So until our next episode, have a great rest of your